Hello, and welcome to the fourth and final session of the 2021 Fairfax County Housing Symposium. This hour's theme, Affordable Housing is Everyone's Job, will focus on housing's role as a key ingredient for growing a robust and strong economy. Once again, we welcome your questions and comments and invite you to submit them using the Q&A icon on your screen. We will look forward to addressing as many questions as time allows. The moderator for this session will be Rachel Flynn, Deputy County Executive for Fairfax County. Rachel oversees the Departments of Public Works and Environmental Services, Transportation, Code Compliance, the Park Authority, Land Development Services, and the Department of Planning and Zoning. She has built a distinguished career in leading efforts to develop award-winning master plans and citywide general plans, and has been honored with numerous recognitions for her planning work, her progressive environmental initiatives, and innovative GIS and technology programs. She holds a degree in architecture with a master's in engineering management from Catholic University and a master's in public administration from Harvard University. Welcome, Rachel. It's a pleasure to have you lead this afternoon's panel.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate the introduction. As many people on this webinar know, Fairfax County has been evolving into a more diverse and inclusive place for all people to prosper. We're seeing changes in places like our older established neighborhoods, Annandale, Seven Corners, Bailey's, Route 1. We call these our community revitalization districts. Our board recently passed the economic incentive program that has a tax break to encourage more investment, more housing, which means more affordable housing. But we're also seeing changes in our urbanizing areas that people have been hearing about: Tyson's, Reston Town Center, Wheelie, Reston, the Mosaic District, Fairfax Corner. These are new walkable, mixed use, dense areas. And part of the reason we're seeing the attraction is because our demographics are changing as well in Fairfax. People want to be in areas where there's diversity in age, ethnicity, income, and household types. Consider that in 1970, 45% of America's households had children. Today, that's down, well, in 4 years, so by 2025, they project that will be down to 25% with children. That's a big change. I remember the neighborhood I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland. There were 8 in our family, and many, many large families in that neighborhood where the families were king and queen, and that is all changing. So that affects housing types. So single family detached demand is decreasing, and townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, multifamily are increasing. Today in Fairfax, we have 425,000 units across all types of housing. And in 25 years, we expect that to grow to 530,000 units, a 25% increase. And a lot of that increase will be in new types of housing that meets the demands of our changing demographics. And a lot of it will be more affordable, frankly, because it's getting smaller, has smaller lots. Today, 46% of our housing is single family detached. By 2045, we expect that to be 40% or lower. So why is this happening? As I said before, it is more affordable, but also millennials, Gen Zers, and empty nesters want to live in mixed use, walkable, dense neighborhoods. So the housing is automatically going to change. Projected demands are that 32% demand will be for single family detached and 68% for all others. People want to drive less. We hear a lot about millennials and Gen Zers not even getting driver's licenses or wanting to own cars. We estimate it's $15,000 a year to own a car when you think about payments, insurance, fees, whatnot. And if you can put that money into your housing, that's about $1,000 a month. That's real money. We now have Uber and Lyft. Biking is more popular, e-bikes in particular, scooters. Transit is getting more popular. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, we've seen a decrease, but we expect that to go back up. We have 11 metro stations in Fairfax, 3 coming online this year, expanded connector bus service. And we're working on what's called Bus Rapid Transit, BRT, on the Route 1 corridor and Route 7. This is a type of precursor to a streetcar, where it allows a bus to be able to have its own dedicated lanes and get through more quickly. And we're creating more walkable areas. So what's the government's role? So today we have Brian Hill, the Fairfax County executive, and we also have Julie Coons with the Northern Virginia Chamber. So we'll hear from the public sector and the private sector. And I always like to say, what does the public sector need to do to help the private sector succeed? We need each other. So government sets the vision, sets the overall overarching policies for land development, transportation, and affordability. Through codes, zoning ordinances, we can change densities, housing types that are allowed by right, whether they're near TODs or not. We can reduce parking, that lowers costs. The more parking you have, that just gets passed on to the tenant. Our board is addressing zoning amendments like mobile home parks. They're looking hard at that issue as the Route 1 corridor in particular starts to change. Just last night, we had a robust, healthy discussion, public hearing on accessory living units, allowing people to have separate units in the house and detached. This is for multi-generational living, whether it's grandparents, adult kids, young professionals. It also provides income for homeowners so that they can afford to own a home, but get some income. Our board recently amended the county's workforce dwelling unit policy. It appointed a housing preservation task force, which will be reporting out to our housing commission on April 6th, or housing committee, that is. And the board is committing general fund dollars, and I'll be having Brian Hill talk about that. Basically, to be affordable, a housing unit should not cost you more than 30% of your income. So in addition to creating more affordable housing, we also want to address jobs and how we can help people get higher incomes. And I'm sure Julie will have a lot to say about that. From my own experience, before I introduce our panelists, I was recently living in California. I was with a private development firm, Lennar, big home building developer, and also Google. And it was interesting to see how they were addressing the California crisis. Google actually committed $1 billion to the Bay Area to build 10,000 housing units. Amazon has committed $2 billion nationally, and some of that money is coming to Nova as we see the HQ2 expand and grow. Google is also looking at innovation in housing construction, whether it's modular units, prefab housing, mass timber instead of steel, which lowers costs. Developers were looking at micro units, what we call affordable by design. A lot of younger people want to live in the smaller units because they're spending most of their time outside anyway, outside their unit. And Google is reducing how many days a week you come in. Right now it's 0, but in the fall it will be 3 days a week. This affects coming to work and where you can live. And then they provide free transportation. So those are just some of the things from my experience working in California that's really a precursor to what we're seeing more and more. So let me introduce our distinguished guests. Brian Hill was appointed County Executive of Fairfax in November 2017. He oversees an annual multi-billion-dollar budget, as well as the daily operations of our organization, which includes over 12,500 employees, one of the biggest employers in the county. Mr. Hill initiated the county's strategic plan, which will be presented this year to the Board of Supervisors for adoption. He also played a lead role in One Fairfax, which is the county's policy on social and racial equity. And this past year, he's been steering the county through its efforts to address the ramifications of COVID-19. Prior to his arrival in Fairfax, Mr. Hill served in numerous positions, including Vice Chancellor for Finance and Operations at the University of South Carolina in Beaufort, Director of Finance for the University of Maryland Office of IT, Deputy County Administration in Beaufort County, and Chief Administrative Officer in James City County. Mr. Hill serves on numerous boards and councils, including the Board of Trustees of his alma mater, Alfred University, the International City County Management Association's Advisory Board on Graduate Education, the Board of Directors of the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation, and GMU's MPA Advisory Council. He holds a master's degree in public administration from the University of Southern California, as well as a bachelor's degree in public administration from Alfred University. And I'll throw in a little tidbit about Brian, who is my boss. that he had a very distinguished basketball career and was affectionately nicknamed the Thrill by his peers. So maybe he can tell us a little more about that. Julie Coons was selected to serve as the president and CEO of the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce in September 2018. She is focused on strategically positioning the chamber as a convener of thought leadership, a vehicle for engagement, and a leader in business advocacy within the region. She focuses on ensuring that chamber's members derive direct value from their membership. Ms. Coons has nearly 20 years in nonprofit management and private sector experience. She served as the COO of the Council of the Better Business Bureau's Board of Directors and was Executive VP of its national programs. She's also served as President and CEO of the Electronic Retailing Association, President and CEO of the Tech Council of Maryland, and Executive VP at PCIA, the Wireless Infrastructure Association. She's been an active member of numerous nonprofit boards, including Advertising Self-Regulation Council, International Women's Forum, American Society of Association Executives, and was director of the advisory board of Market Smith. Ms. Coons is a graduate of the University of the Pacific with a BA in economics and Japanese language and literature. Phew, that's a lot of experience there. So to the questions. Brian, I'm going to start with you. As you know, and I mentioned that you've been steering us through this pandemic over the last year. We've had many morning meetings and strategizing on where to go and what to do, and you really handled it so well. And I thought you could talk about that in terms of the county's economic growth, affordability and housing, and also linking it to the county's budget and how you've had to steer our county through that effort.
Thank you, Rachel. First and foremost, I'm not going to answer the question why they called me Thrill.
Okay, it'll be our secret.
Sidebar. We'll do a sidebar one day. You know, when you look at COVID-19 and the pandemic, you know, I sit back and I say I'm very fortunate to have such a talented and gifted board of supervisors. We have been able to provide them support, and they've been able to provide us support as staff. The leadership there is impeccable. So what we're really looking at is, what is our post-recovery strategy going to be? Our board of supervisors has basically set up our conditions for success. The question is, how do we articulate and maneuver through COVID? And when you look at the things that we have done thus far, it's been striking. It's been phenomenal. We've used the CARES Act funding to the point where it's offset our budget significantly to allow us to continue to do things. Microloans in our community have been a boon for us because it allows our small businesses to keep going. But when you talk about affordable housing, you know, when we look at what we're doing today, the board has placed a marker on our chassis, 5,000 in 15 years. 5,000 units in 15 years. You know, I think we will probably beat that number in next 5 to 7 years by the way we're going. So when we look at how we're kind of continuously keeping the jobs here and then allowing people to live here who can afford to live here so they are closer to those jobs, I think that's something the Board of Supervisors should take a lot of credit for, and their foresight and allowing us to strategically put a plan in place to allow us to move forward.
That's great. And so how is the budget doing? And can you shed some light on that for our listeners and how you know?
I will say this. No, I'm just joking. No, I presented the budget, I believe almost 3 weeks ago. I did request, or I presented a budget with a 1 penny reduction in tax in the rate. So we went from 115 to 114. That's what I proposed. The Board of Supervisors last evening adopted an ordinance to authorize at $1.15, which means they cannot go above that rate. We have balanced the budget on $1.14. However, we are looking for the opportunities that may be presented to us through BPOL and other revenue sources to allow us to do other things. Housing, affordable housing. We spend about $26 million a year. The budget that I submitted last year before the pandemic, there was a full penny for housing, which would have been $27 million on this year's. So basically would have doubled. Unfortunately, that did not happen, but with gifted people like leading our housing efforts, affordable housing efforts, Tom Fleetwood and Tom Barnett, we're getting into a movement where we're thinking outside the box and we're incentivizing how we're doing affordable housing.
That's great. Thank you. Julie, when we think about affordable housing, we can't separate that from jobs and the jobs housing link. Right now, there are 33,000 open jobs in Fairfax County, 100,000 in Nova. How does housing policy play a role in linking these?
Rachel, thank you. And thanks to being here with you and Brian today. I hope I'm stating the obvious to all listeners. Housing availability is directly connected to workforce availability, which is directly connected to economic or business growth. You cannot separate these. We know we have a high demand for workers. We know we have supply, but if they can't afford to live where they want to live, and they increasingly share that they want to live near where they work, we're going to struggle to fill those positions. So, the business community is, I think, even more committed over time as we understand how important available workforce is. And if that workforce isn't available to us because of any number of reasons, including housing, that's an impediment to growth. And so, the reference earlier to the accessory living units, for example, we support that and really hope that the board can move on that. That's the type of thing we need to create, those opportunities so we can have the most diverse in every way workforce that drives innovation and growth in the region.
So I've heard that during COVID, home prices have gone up, which was pretty shocking, at least in our region, and depends where you are in the country, but in our region. And one of the reasons was that, first of all, millennials are getting that age, 30 to 39, where they want to own a home. So there's that. People were kind of hunkering down. They weren't selling. So supply wasn't enough and demand was going up. And then rents went down. And the person who was writing this article said they've never seen anything like it, where there was such a split. And that part of the reason was that, say, young professionals who lived in DC didn't have to go to work anymore. So they moved home. They went somewhere else. So the supply then, affected less demand, more supply, prices go down. But now they're starting to see it shift because there's a real people are getting good deals. Are you seeing anything like that and hearing anything about the workforce or the companies in Fairfax and where their workers went? Are they kind of hunkering down, or did they move?
So a vast majority, and I'll speak with certainly for chamber members, a vast majority went to telework very, very seamlessly. There had always been telework as a part of our workforce. And so very quickly, we were able to very effectively telework. So to that point, it didn't matter where those employees were. So there hasn't been a lot of discussion on whether, a large base moved someplace or not. Yeah. Now, there have been sort of, what I might call sort of some discussion of finding that employees purely moved away. Hi, I've decided to move myself and family to Florida. Would you adjust my tax withholdings? And there's been some discussion about that among employers to say, okay, how flexible are we going to be? What does that mean for us? So there has been some of that, but I would call that at this point anecdotal and not, I have not heard it as a sort of a large impact that when we move back to some probably hybrid model that suddenly they're going to have employees who simply are not able to physically participate. So it hasn't come up a lot.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what data you get when this is all over. By the way, do you know when this will be over? Brian, I'm gonna move to you on that one. When will this be over? But Brian, you had talked about out of the box thinking. Could you speak about the strategic plan and its connection to affordable housing? I know there's a whole policy on affordable housing. So could you tell folks more about that?
Yes, and you asked, the first question you did ask is, when is this going to be over? And I've been running around here saying COVID 60. I'm going to say COVID 82, which is 19, 20, 21, and 22. And if you add the math up, it's 82.
Oh.
I'm looking at this ending sometime in the third quarter to the first quarter of next year, in that range, fourth quarter, first quarter of next year. I don't see us having the capacity to move out of it until we have enough vaccinations to get us out of it. So that has been something that our board of supervisors has been yelling to the governor and yelling to the White House. So we'll see. If we have ample doses, we'll get out of it sooner than later. But at the current rate now, just for everybody on this call, at the current rate now, if everybody in Fairfax County gets one dose with what we get in every week, we're talking at least July, August for everybody to have one dose. So then you wait and do your algorithm for 29 or 28 days, depending on what it is, or Johnson & Johnson, you're looking late fall, early winter before everything is taken care of. That's if we maintain the current level of doses being provided to us. The strategic plan. My thoughts on the strategic plan are this. When I look at the budget, and when I look at the CIP, and I look at the comprehensive plan, there wasn't a crosswalk to ensure that we could have goals absolutely prioritized and hit and made to happen in a period of time that made sense. There is a housing strategic plan and there is an economic development strategic plan, but there is not a countywide strategic plan. Never going to take away from the housing strategic plan or the economic development strategic plan, but I thought it would be good for our staff to understand the crosswalks between each superhighway, the silos that we have created in government, to try to break down those silos so we can articulate when somebody does something in EDA, how does it affect the fire and rescue department, or how does it affect police, and juxtapose that to how does it adversely affect them. So when we talk about strategic planning, I'm looking at setting our conditions for the future. This board sets conditions for the future, but I want everybody to understand where the board's going, as well as where staff we need to go. So when we look at housing, the goal is 15,000 over, the goal is 5,000 over 15 years.
Yep.
That is a strategy. That is a goal. We're going to obliterate that goal because we have put things in place to do that. Our expand affordable housing opportunities. We need to produce, preserve, and improve affordable housing, as Julie said, through partnerships. Looking at the school system and saying your available land, as we build up, can we use some of your available land to have your teachers closer to the schools as opposed to coming from other areas? Excuse me. In the Braddock district, we're looking at, which is right there at the government center complex, Supervisor Walkinshaw has put a proposal to do affordable housing in our parking lot. Bringing people closer to where they work, as Julie said, is a strategy that this board of supervisors has put out there, and it's our job. It's dependent on us as staff to figure out ways to make it happen. So there you have it, the strategic plan, strategic goals, prioritizing where we are, and then having a document that allows us to get there.
Yeah, and I thought what you and the board did was really smart to start looking at land that we already own, because a big part of affordability, how much is the land, right? Your sunk cost.
And saying that, also that includes the park authority that has a spoken word, unspoken word of having 10% of open space. countywide. So figuring out how to do that and then leveraging it with RPA and all the other land development tools that we have. And you know, as we did ZMod last night, you said in your opening, we had a spirited and robust conversation. I don't remember it being robust and spirited, but I do remember it being very, very long. There were 72 speakers.
5 hours? What's wrong with that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you weren't sitting where I was sitting, but it's okay. I know you were upstairs listening. But we have a lot of folks that are involved with what we do here in the county, but our board is really driving the ship and showing us the way of doing it.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel, can I add something? You know,
Yeah.
When Brian was talking about, and you're commenting about, you know, finding opportunities, and the school example is an excellent one. I can tell you that the commercial real estate developers, you know, in the chamber are doing a lot of research, as you can imagine, on what does the future looks like. They've got these properties that they either own or rent, responsible for how are tenants who are in them today going to behave in the future. You know, how are they going to deal with renewals? And one of the things that they are learning is very much this sort of hub and spoke kind of model, that people want to be able to go to a workplace that's near where they live. And so I think, you know, to the extent that, you know, that same applies, that if they can have affordable housing near where these various satellite offices are located, we're going to be able to attract and retain workers as opposed to lose them perhaps to other cities where transportation is less of a challenge. So, you know, I think very similarly to what Brian was referring to, and you know, Supervisor Walkinshaw was talking about building that community where you live, and we just couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I would agree. Before I forget, please send in your questions through the chat, and we will get to those at the last 10 minutes or so of this session. So Julie and Brian, you know, there's two ways to approach it. As I mentioned, you can create more housing that is at a price point that works with people's salaries and where they are, but you can also work to get people's salaries more robust, particularly those who would like more education and training. And I know that many organizations are looking into this. But I wanted to get your thoughts. Earlier today, we heard from the premier educational institutions in this area, GMU, Nova, and Fairfax Public Schools. So what are your thoughts on that, on aligning education, economic development, and housing?
Okay, Brian's on mute, but I think he said Julie go first. Okay, I'll jump in. So the chamber has been a long supporter and continues to be a really strong supporter of investments in education, particularly for upskilling and cross-skilling. And in fact, the chamber's got its own initiative around apprenticeships, and we're seeking other ways to have impact on ensuring that workers particularly who have been displaced, are able to at least maintain the income that they've had within the opportunity, of course, with additional growth and skills to be able to do that. And our higher education with 2-year, 4-year institutions and other types of training programs are integral to that. And it does relate back into, you know, as you point out, the ability to afford housing, although that housing, you know, the greater we can create, more that we can create affordable housing, the better. But yes, you're correct. If someone can afford it because they can find the jobs that pay good wages, and we know that there are many of those available, but it all starts with that upskilling, cross-skilling, and it starts early too. So the chamber's been a long time supporter and of any number of education programs that really make a difference.
Great. Brian?
You know, when I look at that question, I always wonder what type of background a person has who states that they cannot get a job here in Fairfax County when I have the EDA, Economic Development Authority, working in partnership with them, trying to promote the fact that we have over 100,000 open available jobs. So when you hear what they're saying about the background of folks that are applying to those jobs, and I speak directly to our FCPS folks, because it's that cradle to grave type of mentality that I'm working on with the superintendent of schools, as well as the partnerships with Northern Virginia Community Colleges and George Mason University. The question is not, the question should be, how do we keep those individuals who graduate high school, go to college, how do we get them back? That's one question. The next question is the folks that are living here now, how do we uptrain them to do what is necessary for them to be able to afford to stay here, because they're a very important part of our community. So it's really a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach. However, we need to be in the business of community building as well as educational building. And that's what we're doing with One Fairfax. And that's what we're doing on in Mount Vernon on the corridor, as well as throughout Fairfax County. It's uplifting and creating access and equity for all. And if we cannot figure out how to do that as a community, we are going to have that situation where the folks that want to live here can't afford it, as well as the folks who should be living here don't want to come back because it's not, as I want to say, Kathy Lang is the chairman of the EDA, and she said hip and cool. And I had to look at her and say, we don't use those words anymore, but you get what I'm saying. We got to make this place, a little bit more attractive to the younger generation, so they want to stay and raise their families here and be a part of our community.
Are you hearing and seeing that places like Tyson's, Reston Town Center, Wheelie, Mosaic are the answer to what they're seeking?
They are the answer. However, Mosaic, the starting home price in Mosaic is close to $1 million for a townhome. So, you got to balance it out. You want to talk AMI, that's great, but these people that are going to be living in the Mosaic, they're not going to qualify for those affordable housing units because their salaries are going to be just a tad bit over. However, they're in that little crunch where we can't really afford it, but we're going to go for it. So Reston Town Center area is great. Mosaic is awesome, but Tyson's, yes. But we need to do something on the outskirts as well to bring that collective whole together.
Right, exactly. And offer options within those areas. So there's lots of housing types within an area. Yeah, that's how you get that diversity and inclusiveness. Julie, I'd mentioned that corporations like Google or Amazon, are putting billions into affordable housing, just cash. They're giving them to CDCs, community development corporations, and other localities to build this housing. Are you hearing anything from Fairfax corporations to that end? I know no one's going to hand over $1 billion tomorrow, but any type of partnership, whether it's providing funds or some kind of housing itself?
Yeah, I have not heard of any major initiatives per se, but I don't want that to be the comment that employers are not concerned. And there may very well be housing subsidies. One of the things I do know that I have heard about is offering housing subsidies for some types of jobs. Now, the question is that sufficient, right? But still, as some enticement to get folks who would otherwise have to travel too far, that the job becomes prohibitive. So I have heard some of that. I don't know how widespread it is, but it was the one employer who talked to me about it, was not an insignificant employer. So I think for some roles, it did happen.
I wonder, when they hear about Amazon, making this huge announcement, how that what they were saying in their corporate, the boardrooms, and how that affected their thinking. It's a new day. Who would have thought that this would
Right,
start?
right.
Yeah.
Well, overall, an exciting and such a positive influence for Amazon to be here for all of us. And that really is well received by the business community. So I would agree with you that they will be doing things that all of us will be taking a look at and thinking about, and how we can potentially model off of in our own scale and in our own ways. But again, there's just such a clarity that we want a diverse workforce to be here and retain them, and it's got to be affordable for them.
Do they talk about any certain range, like where their employees are having a hard time? Like, what range would it be? The 100% AMI, area median income, AMI.
I haven't heard that level of detail, other than it is clear, back to Brian talking about, Victor, and that he's been holding job fairs, highly successful job fairs and the like, that, there is this gap, and the gap is a result of a number of different causes, including affordability. And so, we know that they are committed to ensuring that all of these things are addressed in order to close that gap and also retain. So.
Right. And to that point, Brian, economies of scale is so important. Have you heard any creative approaches also involving employers that can help us reach that economies of scale in terms of housing?
Yes, actually, I sat down with Sally May. I think they are a local Fortune 5. Again, as I've been going around this large county, vast county, 409 square miles, I've been speaking with all the Fortune 500s as well as many small businesses. Sally May is speaking with us on land development but opportunities to bring people back to their offices, as well as for us to provide them with opportunities in affordable housing. Again, what we do behind the scenes is very important to what we do and promote when it's ready to be put out there. Working with the entire board of supervisors and our partners like Julie, we're going out from a leadership perspective to talk to these Fortune 5s and these other businesses on how we could collectively get our development and zoning processes in place to allow them to put up affordable housing for their staff and bring them back to the inside of their building, which is very important to us for our commercial space. As you know, we have about 20 million square feet of commercial space, Rachel. I think that's empty, not occupied. I think that's the number, but it was 17 last year. But guess what? We added 4.5 million over the last 2 years. So when you look at it, it's 1.5 net loss. And that's really showing in our commercial rate of taxation here in the county. The way the Dillon Rule state works, the residential tax rate is what carries the day. Commercial is down 4.8%. Residential is up the same, but the numbers don't equate to the same number. It's unfortunate. But what we really have to do is some tax reform, allowing Richmond to give us some money back. Right now, we're 14% of the Commonwealth. The residents of Fairfax are 14% of the Commonwealth. We're 24% of the net wealth, but we only get 22.4 cents back on every dollar that's been generated here in Fairfax County because we have such a high LCI. That's local composite index. So there's so many mitigating factors on why we're where we are, but we have the structure and the leadership to get us through it. Looks like we've been able to get through this pandemic pretty good.
Yeah. Speaking of the office vacancies, it's interesting. The county is doing its first project where we're going to transform an office building into housing. And that's also the green way to go. Rather than we just keep tearing down buildings and restarting, we really need to think about reuse, because these buildings have a lot more than just 40 years in them. And so we're seeing that, but also what might be interesting is with hotels. I mean, they've been so hard hit and it's heartbreaking, but they're doing the best they can to try and get people to come back. But with people not going to work, they're not traveling to, their New York or DC office. So they're losing that business, they're losing tourism. But anyway, so it'll be interesting to see if we can use that opportunity for housing. Have you heard
Well,
any?
adaptive reuse is the key. And you
That's
remember
exactly.
you and I were talking about there's about 20 buildings that we were targeting throughout the county
Yep.
for that adaptive reuse. So getting ahead of the curve is the key, thinking outside of the box and helping not only our local officials understand what we have as an inventory, but allowing them the ability to say, this is what I would like to see in our community, and then pushing forward.
Great, thank you. Let's see how we're doing on time. 3:30, and we have a few questions in the chat box. Let's see. Can you say more about what the county is doing to preserve and rehab existing market rate affordable? What tools and resources does the county need to do more of this? Brian, you may, I think I mentioned in my opening remarks about the board putting together a task force on preserving affordable housing. And they will be reporting out on April 6th to the board's housing committee. So do you want to tell folks more about that and what we're doing?
Well, Supervisor Faust on the line, because that guy, he makes me work so hard, and he never ever says thank you. No, I'm just teasing. He always says thank you, but he's in charge of that committee. And again, it's a reuse, adaptive reuse. We're looking at all the options that we can possibly take to the Board of Supervisors to allow them to have the options. It's about the toolkit. How many things can we put in the toolkit to see what we can build and how we can build it effectively and efficiently. Again, we did the budget 2 years ago or last year, but it feels like 2 years ago, with a significant amount of resources for affordable housing. But we're still figuring out ways to do affordable housing even without the additional funds, the funds that we were targeting by the Board of Supervisors. So we've done a pretty good job. In April 6th, you'll see what we have, and we'll move forward from there.
I know that mobile home parks are on their list of recommendations and how we address that, because in a lot of the locations where these were first established and built, those are becoming desirable neighborhoods now for people with more wealth, and at the same time we want to protect the folks that live there. So that's going to be an interesting policy to address. Okay, so Brian, they say this one's for you. Thanks for broadening the conversation about land contributions from public schools and park authority. How do you see those processes proceeding? What might be the structural role of CIP planning, capital improvement program? Also, many businesses have failed under COVID and won't come back. Are there opportunities there in terms of?
Who wrote that question, Rachel?
I don't think it said.
Oh, I'm gonna find out.
Can't tell by the handwriting.
Yeah, COVID and opportunities. So we're working with several hotels who are basically shuttered right now, and we're doing the adaptive reuse with them as well. When I look at our sales tax revenue from businesses, which is why I'm kind of waiting for our B poll numbers to come in, I'm not sure if we have lost a lot of companies or the companies that are still going have done better than they did last year. So I'm really waiting to see what our B poll numbers are and how many businesses are still in business moving into next year. So that comes out in March, this March. So once I have those numbers, I can really start articulating and doing some statistical analysis to see how many businesses we actually lost and how many we pick up. From what I can see right now, it has been a very good year for us from a sales tax perspective, but there are revenue opportunities that we need to continue to explore. TOT is down. I mean, it's 70% down, which is transit occupancy tax. But there are other things that we have seen that are coming up. So I'm really waiting to see where we end up with BPOL so I can give a full year picture. COVID's only been here a year.
So in
Feels
general,
like about 20 years, but it's been here a year. So what I'm really trying to do is wait till I get the last piece before I make any analysis and any understanding of what we have and where we're going to go.
so in general, you're seeing residential assessments up and you're seeing commercial assessments a little bit down. I know I'm generalizing, but that's basically what you're seeing. Okay.
Yes.
Julie, I got a question for you here. It says, are there private-public partnership efforts to support or create housing for workers that provide day-to-day infrastructure, grocery workers, bus drivers, et cetera? I think we touched on that a bit and what you see businesses doing.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that other than I would say generally that the chamber is strongly in support of those types of partnerships. So, as we see them or the early conversations of them occurring, we would be wholeheartedly in support of that.
Yeah. Like as we see restaurants come back in, that's going to be huge. Hotel workers, all that. And let's see. And for Julie, how can the business community help the county with building public support for higher density zoning in residential areas? We need more small homes and duplexes.
So I'll go back to the first thing that I shared when we first started this panel, which is that the chamber truly believes that housing availability is directly connected to workforce availability, and that's directly connected to economic and business growth. And Brian, of course, has the significant detail and expertise around how all of this works. But as a general matter, we need business taxes to support the good schools and the good services that we have here. So if we all want to continue to have, a really wonderful place to live, but we need to address this solution. And so in that sense, the chamber's very prepared to continue to urge the county and partner with the county to make sure that we can bring the public along to make sure that more affordable housing is available.
Great. Brian, I think this one's for you. The federal government has passed the $1.9 trillion relief package. I guess late breaking news. Did the House just vote? They just voted. Okay, everyone, late breaking news. I don't know when the president's going to sign it, but this is a really big deal, really big deal. It includes $300 billion for states and local government. And we're getting all of that, right, Brian?
Every penny.
Okay. That's the question. Okay. Will that be a big help to our budget? Yeah. And maybe add some sense back to affordable housing.
Actually, that does not help our budget per se, but let me make sure everybody understands it. Does it help Fairfax County? Absolutely. Our budget is predicated on recurring dollars. This is a non-recurring dollar. So this allows me to offset many things that we can purchase for the future, for today and for the futures. So that leadership versus management. The management works for today, the leadership looks at tomorrow. So it allows us to really position ourselves into the future because the recurring dollars are key. But if we can offset and not stockpile to this point where we're not going to use it appropriately, but it allows us some leverage and some flexibility. I have to look at the guidelines of what we can spend it on versus what we cannot spend it on. The last stimulus, we received $207 million direct from the federal government because we were a county over 500,000. We're the only county in the Commonwealth over 500,000. So we had a direct dial right into the government, federal government. The rest of the money went to the state, and the state provided 50% of the total to the municipalities and localities throughout the Commonwealth. When they were unable to spend those funds, November, we started seeing requests from the governor to us saying, we need to expend these funds and can you figure out a way to expend them? So we took care of another 150 million. So we were close to getting 350 million over that span of time with the CARES Act funding. This new tranche of money, again, I need to look at the guidelines of what we can spend it on and how we can spend it, but they will not be spent on recurring funds unless I get the go-ahead from the Board of Supervisors. However, with that go-ahead, it also impacts our AAA bond rating. So we have to be very careful from a financial standpoint how we spend the money. But I will tell you, yes, it does help. It helps us offset many things that we've had to buy because of COVID. If COVID wasn't here, obviously this money wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be spending on masks and gloves and gowns and things as such. So it will be something that I get to play with my friend Joe Mondoro. Will be in the back room. He's a chief financial officer. We'll be in the back room figuring out what we can do and what loopholes are in it to allow us to expend every penny from the state, from the federal government, more so than what we're doing with our county dollars.
I know that we gave grants to small businesses. I believe it was 50 million. Am I remembering?
50 plus million.
Yeah. So what did the rest of that money go towards mostly? Or was there a big category that it went to? Or it was all over?
Excuse me. It really went all over the place. We had affordable housing, we had the schools, we had shelters, we had nonprofits, you name it, we did it. And then you had to buy PPE supply. And, here's a good one for you. When the governor came out and said that they were going to vaccinate hospital workers, employees that worked in healthcare, I was on the call with him and I said, so you're going to do hospital workers. However, the folks that bring them to the hospital are not vaccinated. Now, tell me how that makes any sense. And that's where we started getting the 1A, 1B, and 1C categories. So it's just a part of us being able to speak to the federal government as well as the local governments, as well as the state government, to understand where the provisions are within this new amount of money and how we can efficiently and effectively spend those dollars prior to spending the dollars of our county residents.
Okay, and just to explain to folks in the audience who might not know, so 1A was obviously the first phase. We are right now in 1B. We expect
1B with a couple with some variations. They've added ministers and ministers, and there's one other category they've added, janitorial support. Thank you.
Oh.
Whoever said that virtually, thank you.
Let's see. How about one more question here? It says, with the advent of all the teleworking during COVID, how are employers in Fairfax County planning for the effect this will have on the need for workforce housing in the county? Will it change how we perceive the need for more housing here? I'll let either of you take it, both of you.
Well, I think that's a double-edged sword there. I do not think, in my business, I believe we're a social service business, so we're going to need people on the ground here in the office and being able to go out to the communities. And as I stated with Sally Mae, they are also trying to bring people back to the office. So it's really dependent on who the company and organization is and how they want to procure their business model. My business model for Fairfax County, in coordination with our Board of Supervisors, is we're trying to provide services. So we're figuring out who can be on the ground and who can be remote, because that also shrinks our footprint of what we need on the external. So there's a lot of mitigating circumstances, but going forward, I believe we are about 62% virtual right now. I'm thinking in the next year, it's going to edge back down to 50%, 40%. And we'll probably get a sweet spot around 20 and 30%, and it's going to be alternate days.
I concur with Brian. I don't see it from the private sector impacting what we understand is the need for affordable housing. I think it is still settling out, just very much to track what Brian said. Victor Hoskins this morning said, I think his projection is that, approximately 40% of workers are going to be in office and another 40% are going to be hybrid. So, you still are going to have a need and a desire for what we understand to be the projected needs on affordable housing. I see the world of work changing somewhat, but I don't think that it will alter what we know we need.
Yeah, I would agree. All right. Well, before we sign off, thank you both for great conversation. I learned a lot, and hopefully our audience did. But I also wanted to give a shout out to Tom Fleetwood, who is our Director of Housing and Community Development. And Tom was a leader in pulling this conference together, and he's very much behind the scenes. He's the silent partner, and Tom works tirelessly for our residents to have the affordable housing they need. He thinks creatively, he's cooperative. Right now he has almost 2,000 units that he's juggling, whether they're in the idea phase, the planning phase, the construction phase. And so thank you, Tom, and thank you for pulling all this together. We enjoyed being a part of it.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Brian and Julie, for your extremely valuable insights and expertise shared in this session, and to our participants for some really outstanding questions. If we did not get to your questions, please feel free to email them to us at rha@fairfaxcounty.gov. We as a group have been richly rewarded today, and we'd like to extend our sincere appreciation to all of our moderators and all of our presenters and panelists for the countless hours of preparation for today's event, the excellent information and knowledge they've shared with us. At this time, we're preparing to, as we prepare to close the conference, we want to turn some time over to some final speakers. We'd like to introduce at this point Chris Leonard, the Deputy County Executive for Health, Housing, and Human Services. Chris is a graduate from West Virginia University with a master's in public administration. He's been with the county for over 20 years. His leadership has played an integral part in developing and implementing partnerships, programs, and services to support the social and economic well-being of residents, and also to create communities of opportunity across Fairfax County. So we'd like to welcome you, Chris, and turn some time over to you at this time.
Thank you, Ben. And I don't get a basketball shout out like Brian did. I heard that earlier. But thank you. I appreciate it, Ben. And on behalf of Fairfax County Workforce, I'd like to thank the Fairfax County Redevelopment and Housing Authority and the George Mason University School of Business for holding this outstanding event today. Thank you especially to all the presenters that we heard from today. You represent the practitioners in Fairfax County who are providing affordable housing opportunities and other critical services to some of our most vulnerable residents. Today's presenters have reminded us all about the critical importance of affordable housing as a foundation, not only for a strong, successful economy, but also how it impacts other aspects of our lives. We know that housing instability impacts all areas of our lives: education, employment, health, mental health, to list just a few. And outcomes even have the potential to be foundationally worse for children that find themselves in this situation. The elephant in every room for the last 12 months has been COVID-19. And indeed, it is a significant mental health challenge across all populations from children to older adults. The isolation, depression, and fear surrounding the pandemic has heightened the need for access to behavioral health care more than ever. And this is an important reminder that there is no health without mental health. Now, taking a step back, when viewing housing affordability and instability, even before the pandemic, our community had serious challenges. In 2019, for instance, nearly 36% of households rented, and nearly half of these households spent at least 30% of their income on rent. Clearly, pre-pandemic, these households were stressed with their ability to pay rent. But as we have seen in the last 12 months, the pandemic has highlighted, aggravated, exposed a number of systemic inequities in so many areas. Health inequities have been well reported throughout the pandemic. as has the negative impact, negative educational impact of our kids not having in-person school available, particularly for our most vulnerable populations. One Fairfax, our racial and social equity policy, has been adopted by both the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors and FCRHA, is the guiding operational principle for programs and services in Fairfax County. To move from principle to action, efforts need to become ingrained in our decision-making at the local level to ensure that we are aware of equity concerns. Indeed, outcomes have consequences, and One Fairfax intends for us to be aware of these prior to acting. Moving forward, it is important that we all work together to engage sector and community leaders to understand these issues, connect residents with supports, and foster cross-sector partnerships to work collaboratively on long-term solutions. Now, with that in mind, allow me a brief moment to highlight some of the most recent work that Fairfax County has implemented to address housing issues. We have fortified partnerships between our housing and health departments to ensure public health at all of our housing properties, all of which serve low to moderate income residents. We've provided life-saving shelter assistance for housing for hundreds of individuals experiencing homelessness, and we've redesigned a hypothermia prevention program to ensure accommodations for unsheltered individuals throughout this last winter. We utilize hotels to provide quarantine protection, isolation, and decompression emergency housing for those in our community who needed a place to stay to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We utilize federal CARES Act funding to assist residents facing higher risk of eviction, and we helped combat the economic hardships brought on by the pandemic. We extended eviction moratoriums at our housing properties and did not pursue any terminations or evictions based on non-payment of rent. We developed an evictions prevention task force to coordinate a countywide approach to help residents by bringing together county agencies and nonprofit partners. And just on February 14th, just a few weeks ago, we launched a Fairfax County landlord portal modeled after the Commonwealth's, which provides landlords a front door access to the emergency rental assistance funds on behalf of their tenants. So yes, we've made progress, but there's so much more that we need to do to achieve meaningful and long-term solutions to housing insecurities and to recognize the intersection between economic recovery efforts, education, healthcare, and housing to create positive and sustainable outcomes for all of our residents. We will certainly be dealing with the lasting impacts of the pandemic for quite some time, but there is light at the end of the tunnel as vaccinations continue across the region and the nation. Fairfax County is committed to ensuring that we align our collective strategies moving forward for affordable housing with the One Fairfax policy to shape an equitable future for all our residents. So just in closing, thank you again to all the staff who made this event possible, particularly the staff at the Department of Housing and Community Development. And I would echo Rachel's comments about Mr. Fleetwood. He's done a marvelous job leading the effort. Also, again, to our hosts, FCRHA and the GMU School of Business, and our event sponsors, the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors and Virginia Housing. Without all of these organizations, this event would not have been possible. So we look forward to seeing you all again for next year's event, hopefully in person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. In light of the time, I don't know I could get through all your basketball exploits, but thank you so much for joining us today and sharing us those remarks and for your leadership. For our final speaker of the afternoon, I'm very honored to introduce Supervisor John Faust. Supervisor Faust was elected to the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors in 2007 from the Drainesville District. He represents McLean, Great Falls, Herndon, and portions of the Vienna and Falls Church areas. He also serves as chairman of the board's Housing Committee and its Economic Advisory Commission. We're very pleased to turn the time to Supervisor Faust for some closing thoughts.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it. So as chair of the board's Housing Committee, I have the privilege to close out this amazing 2021 Fairfax County Housing Symposium. Basically, I get to say in conclusion and summarize some of the things that you've heard. It's been an incredible event. So we started the day with remarks from federal and local elected officials, including Congressman Connolly, Fairfax County Board Chair, Jeff McKay, and Braddock District Supervisor James Walkinshaw. And the one thing that these three have in common is a shared commitment to providing affordable housing in an equitable way to all residents of Fairfax County. You then heard from local leaders in key industries in Fairfax County: health, education, economic development. The discussion included Patricia Matthews, president of and CEO of Northern Virginia Health Foundation; Victor Hoskins, our awesome president and CEO of the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority; and Dr. Scott Brabrand, superintendent of Fairfax County Schools; and Dr. Gregory Washington, president of George Mason University. Basically, they laid the foundation for a very good discussion over the course of the day of the principle that, stable and affordable housing is fundamental to everything in our lives. So several years ago, the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors acted on that principle, and we developed the first ever countywide housing strategic plan. The first phase of that plan identified the need for in Fairfax County for affordable housing, included 15,000 units over the next 15 years for people earning 60% or less of the area median income. The first phase of the plan also laid out 25 options we had available to us to begin the process of, or to continue the process and expand the process of making affordable housing available. Phase 2 of that strategic plan basically made a commitment to deliver through the county 5,000 units of affordable housing. We agreed to commit a penny of our tax rate, which is equivalent to $27 million per year at the current time, to funding, additional funding for affordable housing. So all that was impacted by COVID. We had to redo our budget, but we did not redo or reduce our commitment to affordable housing. So we come up with many creative and in many instances, creative partnerships for addressing affordable housing. So some of the things we've been able to do, and some of them I'm sure you've heard today, the board's transferred several parcels of land to the Fairfax County Redevelopment and Housing Authority. That land is being developed for affordable housing. Some of the projects include the 150 affordable units at the Oakwood project in the Lee District, 150 affordable units at the Autumn Willow project in the Springfield District. Supervisor Walkinshaw's very creative proposal recently to transfer land at the Government Center, which is currently used or barely used as a parking lot, for more development of affordable housing at the Government Center. Another example, we've amended the board's workforce dwelling unit policy, which has provided hundreds of workforce dwelling units in Tyson's and other areas around the county. We amended it to make the housing provided available to people who earn much less income than what the original program provided, specifically targeting 60 to 80% of AMI. It's going to be a huge help in terms of providing affordable housing to our workforce. There are, in addition, other exciting development projects that are being undertaken by the Fairfax County Redevelopment and Housing Authority, include 279 affordable units at the North Hill project in Mount Vernon District, 240 affordable units at One University in Braddock District, and project I'm very proud of, 274 affordable units at Ovation at Arrowbrook in my district. So the COVID-19 pandemic has tested our resolve, but our board remains committed to developing and preserving as much affordable housing as possible in Fairfax County. Today was a great way to elevate this conversation so everyone can see how this issue affects everything in our lives. And now, with the board's commitment to One Fairfax, we have a clear vision for how to proceed and how to provide affordable housing in an equitable way. I want to thank everyone who had participated in delivering this program today. Chris Leonard touched on all of them that I wanted to thank. So I just say thank you all. Look forward to next year. This is becoming a very important part of our culture in Fairfax County, and it's an important program. We thank you all for participating and helping deliver it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Supervisor, for those closing thoughts. As we close, I would like to share with all of the participants today that video, the recordings from today's event, will be made available in coming days on our event website at fairfaxcounty.gov/housing/2021 Housing Symposium. And we will be sure to send that link to you so that you'll have that available. Additionally, we will also have links to the presentations that were shared as well. We'd invite you to continue to follow us online on Facebook at Fairfax County Housing for continued updates and information in the ongoing work of the Fairfax County Redevelopment and Housing Authority. And you can always contact us with any questions you have at rha@fairfaxcounty.gov. Earlier today, we started off by saying the creation and preservation of affordable housing is a community-wide pursuit. And that was certainly reflected in the diversity of the expertise, the perspective, and the insight of our audience today. In working towards that common goal of making home more attainable for everyone, that diversity will serve as one of our greatest strengths. And we look forward to continuing the conversation and working together to increase those opportunities for housing throughout Fairfax County. Thank you for joining us and have a pleasant afternoon.